I have killed for 10,000 years, and in all that time I had forgotten what it meant to be afraid. Fear is a human weakness, you understand. Something the flesh remembers, but the transhuman body overcomes. We who were once the Emperor's angels learned to master it in our first trials, buried alive in darkness, suspended over killing drops, subjected to pain that would shatter mortal minds. Those who could not conquer fear did not survive to receive the implants. Those who did became something more than human, something that could stand before Damon's and Xeno's horrors without flinching. When I turned from the false Emperor's light and embraced the true gods, I thought I had transcended even that distant memory of fear. The warp gifts make you mighty. They make you eternal. They make you terrible. But on Hadrian's world, in the ruins of Hive Secundus, I heard a sound that turned my transhuman blood to ice water. It was not the roar of a Daemon prince. It was not the shriek of a warp portal tearing reality. It was the sound of lasguns firing in perfect synchronization. A ripple of las fire so coordinated it sounded like a single continuous note, and beneath it, the measured cadence of boots advancing through rubble. I knew that sound. I had heard it 3 times before, across 3 different war zones spanning 40 years of real space-time. Each time, we had won. Each time, we had driven them back or slaughtered them to the last man. And each time, they had made us bleed for it in ways that should not have been possible. The Cadian 203rd Siege Infantry, the regiment that should not exist anymore, because Cadia itself is gone, swallowed by the Eye of Terror. Yet here they were again, somehow, always reforming, always returning, always finding us across the galaxy, as if guided by something more than mere Imperial logistics. My warband does not flee from mortals. We are the sons of Lorgar, word-bearers who have preached the truth of chaos for millennia. We have broken armies, toppled hives, sacrificed millions in the names of the 4 powers. But when I heard that sound, that specific, methodical ripple of coordinated lasgun fire, something in my chest cavity clenched tight around my secondary heart. I want you to understand what we are, before I explain what they are. My brothers and I stand 8 feet tall in our armor. Our bones are reinforced ceramite fused to enhanced skeleton. We have 3 lungs, 2 hearts, organs that filter poison and generate clotting factors that seal wounds in seconds. Our muscles are corded cables of enhanced flesh that can crush steel. Our reflexes operate at speeds that make unaugmented humans look like they're moving through water. A single one of us is worth 100 mortal soldiers in any tactical calculation. We have fought for centuries. Some of us for millennia. We remember wars that occurred before the current Imperium's oldest living generals were born. We do not die easily. We do not break. We do not run, except from them. The first time I encountered the 203rd was on Valthus Prime, a forge world we were raiding for a specific relic. It should have been a simple operation: strike fast, overwhelm the Skitarii defenders, seize the vault, withdraw before Imperial Navy reinforcements arrived. We had 27 word-bearers, 300 cultists, and a bound demon. The defenders were Mechanicus Tech Guard, soulless and predictable. We expected to be off-world within 6 hours. Then the 203rd deployed from orbit ahead of schedule, 4 companies of them dropping directly into our advance. I was leading the left assault spearhead when I first saw them. They were not like other guard regiments. Most Imperial infantry, when they see Chaos Space Marines, experience a moment of psychological shock. It's understandable. We are walking nightmares, living contradictions of their propaganda. We are what angels look like when they fall. That momentary hesitation, that fraction of a second where their faith wavers, is when we close the distance and begin the slaughter. The 203rd did not hesitate. They deployed from their Valkyries already firing, lasguns snapping to shoulders with mechanical precision, and the first volley dropped 2 of our cultist advance squads before they could scatter. Not suppressive fire, not panic shooting, precise, aimed shots at moving targets from 100 meters out. I watched a guardsman, still falling from his grav shoot drop, put 3 lasgun rounds through the visor of a cultist champion I had personally trained. We charged them anyway. What else could we do? We are Chaos Marines. We do not take cover from mortals. I crossed the distance in seconds, my chain axe roaring, my bolter barking shells into their formation. I expected them to break, to scatter, to die. Instead, they shifted formation like a living thing. Squads flowing around each other, in patterns I recognized from ancient Terran military doctrine. They didn't try to stand and trade fire with me. The moment I closed to melee range, they fell back in precise 20-meter increments, leaving behind demo charges that detonated under my feet. Not enough to kill me, they knew that, but enough to stagger me, to slow me, to keep me at exactly the distance where their massed lasgun fire was most effective. I killed 9 of them in that first engagement, but it took me 20 minutes to do it, and by the time I'd carved through their defensive line, our cultists were gone, shredded by coordinated fire, and the rest of the 203rd had repositioned to cut off our extraction route. We lost the relic. Worse, we lost 3 brothers not dead, but wounded badly enough they had to be dragged back to our transport. One had taken a melter charge to the chest and would need months to regenerate. Another had his leg severed by a precisely placed lascannon shot that caught him mid-leap. The third had been buried in a building collapse when their sappers demolished the structure he was using for cover. All carefully calculated, all methodical, all impossibly coordinated for mortal troops who should have been panicking and dying. We withdrew, and in the quiet of the ship afterward, none of us spoke about what had happened. To acknowledge it would be to admit something unacceptable. But I noticed my brothers checking their war gear more carefully after that. I noticed them hesitating a fraction longer before committing to assaults. I noticed the doubt creeping in. And doubt is poison to warriors like us. The second encounter was on Nix Tertius. 3 years later, by the calendar of the Imperium, we were conducting a ritual summoning, attempting to weaken the barrier between reality and the warp to manifest a greater daemon of Tziench. It required 7 days of uninterrupted chanting, blood sacrifice, and psychic focus. We had secured the ritual site thoroughly, a desecrated temple complex in the wastes, surrounded by our cultist pickets, warded with demonic glyphs, protected by our entire warband. The nearest Imperial forces were the Nix militia, 300 kilometers away, poorly equipped and demoralized. We had time, we had security, we had certainty. On the 3rd day of the ritual, the 203rd appeared. I still don't know how they got there so fast. The astropathic communications from Nix shouldn't have reached Imperial command for weeks. Even if they had, deploying a guard regiment across that distance in 3 days was impossible by any normal logistics. Yet there they were, advancing across the wastes in full siege formation, chimeras and Lehman Russes arrayed in textbook assault pattern. We had to abandon the ritual. 7 days of preparation, hundreds of sacrifices, a year of planning gone because we could not hold them. This time I paid attention to how they fought. I watched from the temple walls as they approached. They moved with a discipline I had not seen in Imperial forces since the Great Crusade. Each squad maintained exact spacing. Their vehicles advanced in mutual support positions, never exposing flanks, never allowing us to isolate units. When we unleashed our daemon-bound cultists, gibbering horrors pumped full of warp essence and bloodlust, the 203rd didn't break formation. They switched to specialized munitions, sanctified rounds and blessed promethium, and burned the cultists methodically while maintaining their advance. Their commissars didn't need to execute anyone for cowardice. There was no cowardice to punish. We engaged them in the temple approaches. I led the assault personally this time. Along with 12 of my brothers, we came at them like the wrath of the gods themselves, our armor crackling with unholy energy, our weapons blessed by the dark mechanicum, our bodies enhanced by centuries of combat experience. They met us with coordinated heavy weapon fire, not scattered shooting, not panicked volleys, but orchestrated. Lascannons fired in sequence, forcing us to dodge, disrupting our charge. Heavy bolters laid down suppressive fire on exact positions where we would have to take cover. Autocannons tracked us, leading their shots to account for our superhuman speed. It was like fighting against a single distributed intelligence rather than individual soldiers. I closed with their heavy weapon team. The gunner kept firing until I was 3 meters away, then dropped his last cannon and drew a chainsword. A chainsword. He actually thought he could face me in melee. I backhanded him hard enough to shatter every bone in his torso and send him flying into his loader. Both men died instantly, pulped by the impact, but in the second it took me to kill them, their squad mates had repositioned to a fortified bunker 30 meters back, and I was standing in the open under converging fire from 3 different positions. I had to fall back to cover. I, a word-bearer of 10,000 years, had to retreat from mortals. We held the temple for 6 hours before we were forced to evacuate. Not because they broke our lines, but because they systematically destroyed our escape routes, collapsed our tunnels, sabotaged our transports. They were willing to take catastrophic casualties to achieve specific tactical objectives. I watched a guard squad deliberately draw our fire, dying to the last man to expose our firing position to their artillery. I watched another team advance through a building we'd seeded with traps, losing half their number to the explosives, just to place a demo charge on our ammunition stockpile. They fought like they knew exactly what we would do, like they had fought us before, like they understood us. In the evacuation, we lost 2 more brothers. One was buried when their artillery brought down the North Tower. Another was isolated and actually killed, final death by sustained fire from an entire platoon that concentrated on him alone while accepting horrific casualties from the rest of our force. They surrounded him, weathered his bolter fire, and brought him down through sheer volume of lasgun shots. It took them 93 men to do it. 93 mortal humans to kill 1 Chaos Marine. But they did it, and when we recovered later, I learned they had removed his gene seed and sent it to some Inquisition facility. They knew what to do with our remains. They knew our secrets. The doubt was no longer subtle after Nyx. My brothers started talking, in the quiet hours between raids. Who were these men? How did they keep finding us? Why did they fight with such precision, such fearlessness, such understanding of our tactics? Some suggested they were blessed by the Corpse Emperor, given gifts by his rotting psychic power. Others thought they were simply the best the Imperium could produce, cream of the crop, forged in the crucible of Cadia's endless wars. One brother, Varkash, who had fallen with me during the heresy itself, suggested something else. He said they reminded him of how we used to fight, back when we still served the Emperor, back when we believed in something other than our own power. I struck him for that. I shouldn't have. It was an emotional reaction, which is itself a weakness. But he had touched on something I'd been trying not to think about. The 203rd fought like we once fought, with purpose, with brotherhood, with absolute faith in their cause. They didn't fight for glory or personal power. They fought because they believed, truly believed, that they were defending humanity against darkness. That certainty gave them strength that transcended their mortal limitations. It made them dangerous in a way that raw physical power could never match. The third encounter was on Hadrian's world, in Hive Secundus. We had been hired by a renegade governor to crush a rebellion. Simple work that would replenish our resources and give our cultists battle experience. The rebels were factory workers, under-hive gangers, nothing significant. We expected resistance from local enforcers at worst, maybe a PDF regiment if we were unlucky. Instead, the 203rd dropped from orbit the day after we made planetfall. How they knew we were there, how they arrived so fast, how they always found us, these questions gnawed at me. It was as if the Imperium had assigned them specifically to hunt us, as if we had become their specialty. We met them in the industrial sector, in the processing plants, where the Hive manufactured weapons for the Imperial war machine. The terrain was a nightmare of catwalks, furnaces, conveyor systems, and chemical vats perfect for close combat, where our superiority should have been absolute. They turned it into a killing ground. They knew the facility better than we did, had clearly studied the layouts, positioned troops in advance. When we entered the main fabrication hall, they were already dug in on the high catwalks with heavy weapons. They had mined the lower approaches, and they had sabotaged the industrial machinery to create kill zones. I led 20 brothers into that hall. We had fought together for centuries. We knew each other's movements instinctively. We were a battle-forged brotherhood of demigods. The 203rd had perhaps 300 men in that facility. By any rational calculation, we should have massacred them. Instead, they bled us. They hit us from multiple angles, forcing us to divide our attention. They used the terrain against us, collapsing catwalks when we climbed them, opening furnace vents to flood corridors with superheated gas, activating machinery to create barriers and choke points. They targeted our weak points with disturbing accuracy joints in our armor, vision lenses, weapon feeds. I killed 37 of them personally. I remember because I counted, because I was trying to make it feel like victory. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like murder, like slaughtering men who should have been running but instead stood their ground and made me work for every death. One guardsman, both legs crushed under debris, continued firing his lasgun at me until I was close enough to crush his skull with my boot. Another detonated a demo charge strapped to his own chest when I grabbed him, hoping to take me with him. The explosion barely scratched my armor, but the intent, that willingness to die if it meant hurting me, that shook something deep in my psyche. We cleared the fabrication hall, but it took us 4 hours and cost us another brother, wounded severely enough that he had to be evacuated. The 203rd withdrew in good order, fighting every step, making us pay for every meter. When we finally secured the facility, we found their casualty reports abandoned in their command post. 273 killed, 81 wounded. They had lost nearly 90% of their force in that engagement. By Imperial doctrine, by any military standard, they should have broken long before reaching those numbers. But they hadn't. They had held until their objective was achieved, delaying us long enough for the Hive's remaining defenders to evacuate the civilian sectors we'd been planning to raid for sacrifices. That night, I couldn't enter my meditation trance. I kept hearing that sound, that precise ripple of coordinated lasgun fire. I kept seeing their faces, not twisted with fear, not blank with conditioning, but focused, determined, human. They were not mindless servitors. They were not fanatical zealots. They were professional soldiers who understood exactly what they were fighting and chose to fight it anyway. That choice, that voluntary embrace of near-certain death in service of their cause, was something I had not seen in the Imperium for millennia. It was something we Chaos Marines had lost when we turned from the Emperor. We fight for power now, for glory, for our own elevation. They fought for each other, for their homes, for their idea of humanity's future. I began researching them, using our network of informants and corrupted Imperial databases. The Cadian 203rd Siege Infantry had been founded 700 years ago on Cadia, trained in the brutal doctrines that made that world the linchpin of the Imperium's defense against the Eye of Terror. They had faced chaos for generations, had fought the Black Crusades, had seen what we were and what we could do. Unlike most Imperial forces, they weren't protected by ignorance. They knew that Chaos Marines were fallen angels, that we had once been the Emperor's finest, that we possessed capabilities far beyond mortal soldiers, and they had developed tactics specifically designed to counter us. Their training emphasized what they called transhuman engagement protocols, specialized techniques for fighting enemies with superhuman speed, strength, and resilience. They drilled endlessly in coordinated fire, knowing that a single guardsman could never kill a space marine, but 10 guardsmen firing in perfect synchronization could overwhelm even our enhanced physiology. They studied our tactics, our weaknesses, our psychology. They knew we were arrogant, that we expected mortals to break, that we would underestimate them, and they used that against us. But it was more than tactics. The 203rd maintained something most guard regiments lost: after deployment to distant war zones unit, cohesion, and purpose. They were not conscripts pressed into service and shipped across the galaxy to die on worlds they'd never heard of. They were volunteers who believed in their mission. They trained together, fought together, died together. They had continuity across generations through a regimental culture that passed knowledge from veterans to recruits. When Cadia fell, the 203rd survivors had scattered across multiple Imperial forces, but they had reformed, reconstituted themselves, maintained their identity and their traditions. They endured. I found records of other Chaos warbands encountering them. The Iron Warriors had lost a siege on Cronus Prime when the 203rd held a critical fortress for 6 weeks beyond any reasonable expectation, long enough for Imperial reinforcements to arrive. The Night Lords had abandoned a terror campaign on Valhalla when the 203rd proved immune to their psychological warfare, refusing to break no matter how horrific the displays of mutilated corpses and tortured captives. The Black Legion had suffered embarrassing casualties on Medusa 5 when the 203rd coordinated with local Mechanicus forces to destroy 3 Land Raiders and kill 7 Chaos Marines in a single engagement. We were not the only ones who had learned to fear them. Fear. That word kept returning to me. I had not felt fear in millennia. I had not needed to. But now, reading these reports, understanding what these mortals represented, I felt its cold touch again. Not fear of death. I have died and been reborn in the warp multiple times. Death is meaningless to me now. No, I feared what they represented. I feared their humanity, their purpose, their unity. I feared the possibility that we, in our quest for power, had become weaker rather than stronger. I feared that these mortals with their brief lives and fragile bodies possessed something we had lost and could never reclaim. My warband noticed my research. Varkash confronted me in the meditation chamber, where I'd been reviewing tactical footage of our encounters with the 203rd. He asked me directly, why was I so obsessed with these mortals? Why did they matter? We had fought the Emperor's finest and survived. We had clashed with loyalist space marines and held our own. We had banished daemons and toppled hive worlds. Why should we care about one guard regiment, no matter how skilled? I couldn't answer him at first. How could I explain that every time I heard that specific pattern of lasgun fire, I remembered what it felt like to believe in something? How could I tell him that watching them fight with such coordinated precision reminded me of when we word-bearers had that same unity of purpose, back when we crusaded in the Emperor's name? How could I admit that their willingness to die for each other made me realize that my brothers and I would abandon each other to save ourselves, that our brotherhood was a hollow shell built on mutual utility rather than genuine loyalty? Instead, I told him what I'd learned about their tactics. I explained their transhuman engagement protocols, their coordination drills, their specialized munitions. I showed him footage of how they'd killed that brother on Nix Tertius, how they'd isolated him and brought him down through perfect fire discipline. I thought he would appreciate the tactical intelligence, that we could use this knowledge to counter them more effectively. Varkash watched the footage in silence. When it finished, he said something that haunts me still. He said, "They fight the way we used to fight, before the fall, before we learned to rely on warp gifts and daemon weapons. They still fight like Space Marines were meant to fight as brothers, in perfect trust, with absolute purpose. That's why we fear them, not because they're dangerous, because they're us. The us we killed when we turned traitor." I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to insist that we were superior, that we had transcended the limitations of loyalty and faith, that we were more powerful now than we ever were as the Emperor's lapdogs. But the words died in my throat because I knew he was right. The Chaos Gods give us strength, yes. They give us immortality and power and freedom from the constraints of Imperial doctrine. But they also isolate us. Every gift brings madness. Every blessing brings mutation. Every step deeper into chaos takes us further from each other, makes us more individual, more selfish, more alone. The 203rd fought as a single organism. When one squad was in trouble, others moved to support without orders. When officers died, Sergeants stepped up seamlessly. When casualties mounted, the survivors didn't break, they reformed and continued fighting. They trusted each other absolutely because they shared purpose, shared sacrifice, shared faith in something larger than themselves. We Chaos Marines have no such unity. We cooperate when it serves our interests, but we would betray each other for power without hesitation. We are mighty individually, but fractured collectively. And that fracture is a weakness these mortals exploited brilliantly. After that conversation with Varkash, I tried to push the 203rd from my thoughts. We had other battles to fight, other missions to complete. For 2 years, we operated in the Ultima Segmentum, raiding Forge worlds and Agri worlds, building our strength for a major offensive. I told myself I had moved past my obsession. I told myself that one guard regiment didn't matter in the grand scope of the eternal war. I told myself I was over it. Then, on Gorol Prime, I heard the sound again, that precise, methodical ripple of coordinated lasgun fire. The 203rd had found us once more, or perhaps we had found them, or perhaps, and this thought terrified me more than anything, perhaps we were drawn to each other now, locked in some spiral of fate, where we would meet again and again across the stars. They were hunting us as certainly as we were trying to avoid them. This time was different. This time, when I saw their banners deployed across the battlefield, I felt my secondary heart skip a beat. I felt my enhanced physiology react with a flood of adrenaline and heightened awareness, all the biological responses to threat that my body should have mastered centuries ago. I was afraid, genuinely, truly afraid in a way I had not been since my trials as an aspirant 10,000 years ago. We were raiding a weapons depot, trying to secure arms for our cultist forces. The 203rd was stationed there as garrison troops, fortifying the facility against exactly this kind of assault. They had prepared the ground thoroughly, turning the depot into a fortress designed specifically to kill Chaos Marines. They had created kill zones with overlapping fields of fire. They had positioned heavy weapons in hardened bunkers that would require sustained firepower to breach. They had mined approaches and prepared fallback positions in depth. It was a tactical masterpiece, designed by mortals who understood that they couldn't match us in strength, but could neutralize our advantages through preparation and positioning. We had 43 Chaos Marines, 500 cultists, and 2 Daemon engines. The 203rd had approximately 2,000 troops, armor support, and artillery. By normal calculations, we should still have had the advantage our quality versus their quantity. But these weren't normal troops. These were the men who had stopped us 3 times before. These were the soldiers who had killed our brothers, who had made us bleed, who had forced us to retreat. These were the mortals who had taught us to fear. I addressed my warband before the assault. I tried to inspire them, to remind them of our superiority, to invoke the blessings of the dark gods. But I could see it in their eyes, the same doubt I felt. They had heard the stories. Some had fought the 203rd before. They knew what was coming. We attacked anyway, because retreat without engaging would be an admission of cowardice we couldn't afford. But we attacked cautiously, carefully, without the reckless aggression that usually characterized our assaults. We had learned to respect these mortals, and that respect was itself a kind of defeat. The battle lasted 9 hours. We made incremental progress, taking positions one by one, paying in blood and time for every meter. The 203rd fell back in good order, exacting a toll for every position they abandoned. They didn't cluster stupidly in positions we could devastate with concentrated fire. They spread out, forcing us to engage them in small unit actions where their coordination and our arrogance worked against us. They set traps that wounded rather than killed, understanding that recovering a wounded brother took multiple Chaos Marines out of the fight, while killing one only made the others angrier and more reckless. I personally led the assault on their central bunker complex. I had 17 brothers with me, the strongest and most experienced fighters in our warband. We should have crushed them. Instead, We spent 3 hours grinding through defensive positions that had been designed with our capabilities in mind. They had sighted their heavy weapons to force us to advance through kill zones. They had prepared explosives that would detonate only after multiple targets were in the blast radius, maximizing casualties. They had positioned snipers with hellguns in locations that could target weak points in our armor vision slits, weapon feeds, joint seals. I watched Brother Kalash die in that assault. He had survived the Siege of Terror, had fought in the Long War for 10 millennia, had been marked by all 4 Chaos Gods for his service. A mortal guardsman with a melter gun, dug into a spider hole we hadn't detected, fired a single shot that caught Kalash in the torso and melted through his power armor, his enhanced organs, his augmented skeleton. Kalash, who had killed loyalist space marines and greater daemons, died instantly to one shot from a soldier whose name we never learned. The guardsman died seconds later when we obliterated his position, but it didn't matter. He had achieved his mission. He had traded his worthless mortal life for a demigod's, and by any calculation that was a victory for the Imperium. We took the bunker eventually. We killed them all, every last soldier who couldn't evacuate, but we lost 6 brothers in that assault, 2 dead, 4 wounded severely enough they would be combat ineffective for months, for a weapons depot, for a secondary objective. And when we inventoried our haul, we found that the 203rd had sabotaged the weapons before retreating, rendering most of them useless. They had made us fight for scraps, and even those scraps they had denied us. In the aftermath, covered in the blood of men I had killed, standing in the ruins of a bunker I had taken at terrible cost, I finally understood. The 203rd wasn't just fighting us tactically, they were fighting us psychologically. Every encounter, every battle, every costly victory we achieved against them eroded our confidence and our unity. They were teaching us that mortals could hurt us, that humans could kill us, that the Imperium still possessed warriors who could match us despite our enhancements and our dark blessings. They were making us doubt ourselves, and that doubt was more damaging than any weapon they could deploy. I realized something else, too. The fear I felt when I heard their Lascan fire, that wasn't weakness. It was sanity returning. For 10,000 years, I had existed in a state of arrogant certainty, convinced of my superiority, dismissive of mortals as insects beneath notice. The 203rd had shattered that delusion. They had forced me to confront reality, that courage and skill and unity could triumph over raw power, that believing in something larger than yourself gave you strength that physical enhancements couldn't match, that humanity fragile, brief, mortal humanity possessed a resilience that we Chaos Marines had lost when we abandoned our humanity for power. They were everything we had once been, before we fell. Disciplined warriors fighting for a cause they believed in, trusting their brothers absolutely, willing to sacrifice themselves for the mission. And we were everything they would become if they followed our path, powerful, immortal, isolated, hollow. Every encounter with them was a reminder of what we had lost. Every battle was a mirror showing us our failure. No wonder we feared them. They were our past come back to haunt us. Proof that the path we'd chosen had not made us stronger, but had instead stripped away the very things that had made Space Marines effective in the first place. I knew then that we would encounter the 203rd again, perhaps many times. They would keep hunting us. We would keep trying to avoid them, and fate, or the Chaos Gods, or the Emperor's lingering will would keep bringing us together. And each time, more of my brothers would die, not because the 203rd was stronger than us, but because they were better than us in the ways that mattered. They had purpose. They had unity. They had faith. We had only power, and power without purpose is just noise and fury signifying nothing. After Goral Prime, I stopped trying to fight this realization. I stopped trying to convince myself that we were superior. Instead, I began to wonder if there was a way back. If a Chaos Marine could somehow return to that state of purpose and brotherhood we had known before the fall. But I already knew the answer. The Chaos Gods don't let you go once they've marked you. The mutations can't be reversed. The deeds we've done can't be undone. We are trapped on this path, becoming more powerful and less human with each passing century, until eventually we're just warp stuff in the shape of what we once were, our original identities completely consumed. The 203rd doesn't have that problem. When their soldiers die, new ones are recruited and trained in the same traditions. The regiment continues, the knowledge passes on, the purpose endures. They are immortal as a collective, even though each individual is mortal. We are individually immortal but collectively already dead, just corpses that haven't stopped moving yet. That's the real horror I've learned. Not that mortals can kill us, though they can, but that they will outlast us. Their purpose will endure after we've been banished back to the warp or finally destroyed. The Imperium, for all its flaws and brutality, has something we Chaos forces will never have: continuity, tradition, shared sacrifice across generations. That gives them strength we cannot match. Varkash asked me recently if I regretted our choice, turning from the Emperor to serve Chaos. I couldn't answer him honestly. How do you explain that you simultaneously believe you were right to reject the Emperor's lies, while also understanding that you've lost everything that made you who you were? How do you acknowledge that power isn't the same as strength, that immortality isn't the same as endurance, that freedom from constraint isn't the same as freedom to build something meaningful? I think about the 203rd constantly now. I dream about them when I enter my meditation trances, dreams of lasgun fire and coordinated advances, and soldiers who fight with the certainty that even if they die, their brothers will continue their mission. I dream about what it was like to be part of something larger, to trust completely, to believe that your sacrifice mattered. I wake from these dreams into the reality of my existence, a wandering warrior bound to capricious gods, fighting for no purpose beyond accumulating power, surrounded by brothers who would kill me for advancement, slowly mutating into something that barely remembers what it was like to be human. And I know that the next time I hear that sound, that precise, methodical ripple of coordinated lasgun fire, I will feel fear again. Not fear of death or defeat, but fear of confronting proof that we chose wrong, that we abandoned the best parts of ourselves for power that hasn't made us stronger where it counts. The 203rd Cadian Siege Infantry isn't just dangerous because they kill Chaos Marines. They're terrifying because they represent the road not taken, the warriors we could have remained, the brotherhood we destroyed when we turned traitor. So yes, Chaos Marines fear the elite regiments of the Imperial Guard. Not all Chaos Marines, perhaps. Not the ones so lost to mutation and madness they've forgotten what it's like to think clearly. But those of us who retain enough of our original minds to recognize what we're seeing, we fear them. We fear them because they're better than us in ways that matter more than strength or speed or immortality. They have each other. They have purpose. They have faith in something beyond themselves. And we have nothing but power. And power alone is never enough. I write this knowing that I will face the 203rd again. Maybe on the next world, maybe years from now. But we are bound together now in some spiral I don't fully understand. When I do face them, I will fight, because that's what I am, a warrior, even if I've forgotten what I'm fighting for. I will kill them, because I am good at killing, and that's one of the few things my long existence hasn't stripped from me. But I will fear them, because they remind me every time what we lost when we chose this path. And in the quiet hours afterward, covered in their blood and my brother's ichor, I will count my dead and wonder which side truly won, the side with more power, or the side with more purpose. I already know the answer. I've known it since Valthus Prime, since Nix Tertius, since Hadrian's World. I've known it every time I heard that terrible, beautiful sound of soldiers advancing in perfect coordination, trusting each other absolutely, dying together rather than living alone. The 203rd has already won, in every way that matters. They just keep killing us, to remind us of that fact. And we fear them, because we know it's true, even if we can never admit it aloud. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But even in war, some warriors fight for something beyond themselves. And those warriors, mortal though they may be, are the most dangerous enemies we Chaos Marines will ever face, because they have what we lost, and we can never get it back.